evening. From the Space Shuttle Columbia, now high over the Pacific, silence. It's changing itself from a spacecraft into an aircraft, its surface glowing red-hot as it re-enters the atmosphere. And it's so enveloped in electrified gases that no radio signal can get in or come out from it for the moment. But in 6 or 7 minutes, Young and Crippen should be clear, and we'll hear if it's all been a success. Well, now, this was the last exchange of signals before the blackout began.
We're 50 seconds from LOS. Everything looks perfect going over the hill. Nice and easy does it, John. We're all riding with you.
Thought it was crowded here. I thought it was crowded here.
10 seconds to LOS. We'll see you about Mach 12.
So, with John Young complaining that it's hot in here, inside his spacesuit, of course, pressurized now for the re-entry. However, they were saying a little earlier on the crew looked good, and one of them said, well, you haven't seen us lately. Well, these are the familiar pictures now of them cavorting about in space. That's Young in the foreground. I don't think he's actually talking to Vice President Bush on the telephone. That would be a little disrespectful. But they plainly have enjoyed the flight, and it plainly is a much more capacious craft than anything before. And there is Young with the spectacles on his nose, going about his work as a space pilot. And now, Geoffrey?
Well, Columbia re-entered the Earth's atmosphere halfway across the Pacific Ocean, coming towards the end of what would have been her 37th orbit. She hit the atmosphere about 77 miles up and started the long, high-speed glide towards the Edwards Air Force Base in California. This is now her moment of greatest danger. Slowing down from 16,000 miles an hour, the friction of the air is heating up her underside to temperatures around 1,500 degrees centigrade. Her protective tiles, designed to be tough enough for 100 flights, are being tested at this moment for the very first time. Well, NASA mission controllers have expressed continuing confidence that no vital tiles fell off during the launch, even though some are missing from 2 engine pods at the tail. They could have been knocked off by an unexpected shockwave on liftoff, but mission scientists have calculated that stresses on the tail pods should be less on descent. But whether the vital heat shield underneath is doing its job, we won't know for certain until the end of this radio blackout.
And now from the man who really does know what re-entry is like, Dave Scott of Apollo 9 and 15. What's particularly complicated for the pilot now?
Well, the most complicated thing is his transition from a spacecraft to an airplane. And as he goes through the environment in which you pick up more and more air molecules, the small rocket engines that normally control the attitude are superseded by aerodynamic surfaces, like an airplane. At this point, there is a possibility of conflict between the two, and it may be a very interesting control problem for John Young if the conflict does exist.
But he's about the most experienced man in space now.
Oh yes, John is indeed. By now, he is the most experienced.
Well now, what margin for error is there in all this?
Well, we have quite a bit of margin as we come in because the ship is built to produce lift as it comes through the atmosphere and install a certain amount of energy as we come out of blackout so that we can land someplace near Edwards Air Force Base. This energy that's accumulated in the vehicle is dissipated as John Young will do some maneuvers before he makes his landing.
So the times that we're giving about when they can come through the atmosphere possibly could be wrong. I mean, they could be quicker, they could take longer.
That's right. It depends on this uncertain area between space and the atmosphere, in which we really don't know a lot about it.
Well, still waiting, of course, for the radio contact, but it's possible that radar may pick them up before any radio signal comes through.
That's true. The sheath of gases around the vehicle provide a nice target for radar, and if they come in range, we may get a contact by radar before we hear voice contact.
Well, we'll be listening for that. Now, when you're actually cut off from anything, you can't hear Houston talking to you. What's it like?
Well, they're very busy at this point of time, and it's really not necessary to transmit any communications because the automatic system is flying it, John Young is monitoring it, and everybody's doing their job. The control center in Houston really has no role to play at this time.
There's no way of getting around this blackout problem. I mean, is this going to dog spacecraft for all time?
Yes, I believe it will. We tried some experiments during the Gemini program to eject a layer of material to eliminate it, but we were unsuccessful, so we live with it.
2 minutes, 53 seconds. It's counting down to acquisition of signal at the Buckhorn tracking station at Edwards. That's the first place where we will get telemetry. If Vandenberg's successful in bringing back up their system, we may get C-band radar ahead of that, contact ahead of that time. But we would not get voice communications or telemetry prior to about 2.5 minutes.
So 2.5 minutes, he's saying. Are you conscious of the enormous heat all around you as you come through and re-enter?
Yes, you're conscious not so much from the temperature, but from the fact that there will be a glow over the windshield as they come in, and they'll definitely see this sheath of ionized gases.
We should be able to talk to the crew aboard Columbia.
Well, now, if things are going well...
Chase, this is Houston. You can anticipate getting a Mach 9 call. Over.
There's one copy, Houston.
Houston out.
That's the chase planes, which are up in the air already.
Yes.
Now, if things have gone well, Young should be in control of the craft himself by now, is that right? It should have become a glider.
No, it's a glider, but it's still under automatic control until he gets to about 35,000 feet over the landing site at Edwards Air Force Base, and then he'll take over manually.
There's one of the chase planes up in the air. We hope to get pictures from one of them in due course. That'll be the first picture of them coming in. We'll hear NASA's words.
Mark 1 minute.
Chase, stand by for the Mach 9, 9,700 feet per second call.
Which one? AOS.
Stand by. Mark.
In automatic flight control.
Chase, disregard the Mach 9 call. We'll give it again shortly.
We'll go. Showing an altitude of 2 C-band radar contacts showing an altitude of 165,000 feet.
That's his
Range to go
phenomenal.
410 nautical miles.
Stand by for Mark on 9,700 feet per second.
Hello, Houston. Columbia's here.
Hello, Columbia. Houston's here. How do you read?
Land clear, and we're doing Mach 10.3 at 180 AS.
And we couldn't agree more, John. Your state vector's good. We've got good data in-house.
Okay, now looks to me like the L over D is nominal.
The L over D is a lift for landing.
And that looks like Columbia coming through.
Mach 9 at 9,700 feet per second.
Columbia, you got perfect energy, perfect ground track.
Roger that.
Oh, that's excellent.
Columbia now 9 times the speed of sound. Flight dynamics
And John, we're showing you rolling right. Looking good.
Right, normal roll.
With the perfect energy, he should be able to touch down exactly
Rolling
where he
now.
wants to.
Chase will be on time.
Okay.
Says the chase airplanes will be able to join up okay.
52,000 feet, range 211 miles, speed Mach 8.8.
So here it comes, 80 tons
Roll reversal
of
complete.
glider. That's quite a job.
It's quite a job, but I think we understand it quite well,
Columbia, we're
especially
showing
now
out
that we're
of
through this phase.
151K now, 8.4 Mach, looking good.
Roger that, Dan. I got a solid TACAN lock on TACAN 2 and 3.
Roger that, Trip, we're looking.
That's just an indication on the panel of the pilot side.
All 3 APUs hanging in there, looking good.
Roger that, we concur. We have a live television picture from the optical tracker at Anderson Peak. Crossing the coastline
We'll
now.
show you crossing the coast now.
Roger that. We concur. 141,000 feet. Range
Columbia,
240
we
miles.
like the TACANs, go ahead and take them.
Okay, going in.
He puts his TACAN in so he has his range to the touchdown point.
Crew now in course incorporating tactical air navigation system data into the spacecraft. Mach 7. 135,000 feet, range 221 miles.
Columbia,
Dead on the ground
very
track.
quiet to it.
Well, let's go out in here, too. What a way to come to California.
Now they enter a phase where they're very familiar as they get closer to the landing
Columbia, you're
site.
out of 130K now on the tracking, 6.4 Mach, looking good.
Roger that. I agree with those numbers.
So they say on board,
And Columbia, your nav state with TACAN is perfect.
Roger that.
they say on board the numbers look the same as the radar on the ground.
24,000 feet. Range 177 miles.
That's why they keep on saying perfect.
Right, it's just a phenomenal re-entry so far.
And John, we're seeing near zero aileron trim.
We're seeing 210. Yeah, less than that now.
That says
Roger
it's,
that, out of 119K, 5.5 Mach.
it's 119,000 feet,
All flight controllers giving perfect report.
and the aerodynamic control surfaces are working well.
So the tiles work well too.
Tiles work well, controls worked well, everything's worked well to this point.
Yes, hydrogen purge in progress.
Roger that, out of 112K, 4.8 Mach.
Range 130.
In a row.
John Young rolling using manual control now.
We see Dill at 21 degrees.
Roger that. Looking good.
He's burning off some excess energy now, so he'll hit his point over the airfield at precisely the right place.
He's got quite a bit of mileage on the runway.
Range 112.
Yes, he has a comfortable margin, and he's practiced it many, many times on this runway.
Now there could be a little sonar boom as it comes in. Wonder if
Yes,
it-
he said a
Roll
mild
reversal complete.
shock wave
Control
will hit.
looks good.
Columbia, we see roll reversal complete, control looks good.
Rope's coming out.
He's now fairly well established on his glide path.
And you're starting to get ammonia cooling now.
Roger, we can try.
And Columbia, you're out of 100K with positive C. Looking good.
His energy's correct. He's at 100,000 feet, and he's almost to the point where the chase planes will find him.
Beautiful.
Below 100,000. Mach 3.
Okay, rope's out. And air data looks pretty good for here.
He just put his airspeed
Roger that,
indicator
we're
out.
good, we're looking at him, and you're coming right down the chute.
Now he has an indicator
Rudder
telling him how
active now,
fast he's
looking good.
going in the air, just like an airplane.
Range 73 miles.
Columbia, we're go for air data. You're out of 89K, 2.8 Mach.
The air data will be the airspeed indication, and the chase planes will read those airspeeds to the Columbia for confirmation as soon as they join together.
Roger that, we're looking.
Okay, take in failure.
TACAN failure, his range, but that's not really a problem.
They all look very relaxed suddenly at Houston.
Roll reversal to the right.
Columbia, we see you coming right, looking good.
Okay, Joe, have my time to end the talk back on those landing gear, hydraulic and isolation valves. They look okay to you?
Okay, Chris, they all look good to us.
Roger that.
It's landing gear indicators. The landing gear are up now, and of course they'll have to put them down just before they touch down.
What a picture.
We now have a live television picture from the long-range optics at Brighton Flight
Columbia, you're
Research
coming
Center.
right down the track. The tracking data, nav data, and pre-plan trajectory are all one line on our plot boards here.
Roger, we can try.
That's amazing.
Well, the crowd's
Out
right
of
at Edwards
70,000 feet at
Air
Mach
Force Base.
1.8. Range 42 miles.
Columbia, we show you very slightly high in altitude, coming down nicely, and the FES is to go to off.
Most of the landing will be done visually as he approaches Edwards Air Force Base, so the range and the altitude are important, but John Young could land it without that if he had to.
Range 33 miles.
By now he can see the dry lake bed, and you might say,
6K, looking good.
okay, he's about 6 minutes from touchdown right now, and he's in an area where he can land it visually if he loses complete radio contact and complete instrumentation except for his airspeed, which they just checked, and it works fine.
And he's a cool customer.
Mach 1 at 51,000 feet, range 28 miles.
Columbia, you're going subsonic now out of 50K, looking good.
Roger that.
Now he goes beyond the field, doesn't he? Loops
Yes.
round and comes back.
Yes, he loops around, and if you look careful, it looks like the chase planes are there now. And we should soon get a television picture from a chase plane.
Right on the money.
He goes over the point of touchdown and circles around about 225 degrees to the landing point. Very much like a standard airplane landing pattern.
Without an engine.
Columbia getting
Without
ready
an
to start
engine.
the big sweeping turn into the runway.
37 tally.
Chase tally means the chase airplane
And
has him in
trip,
sight.
altimeter 3009er.
So he sets his altimeter, and then he can measure his altitude above the touchdown point as he normally would in an
38,000
airplane.
feet, range 19 miles.
Columbia, you're coming right around the hack, looking beautiful.
Base count aboard 30,000.
Is it 30,000 feet? The chaser joining up with him.
Very smooth.
Now the chase airplane will look at the landing gear when it comes down and verify that it's
Columbia,
down
you're
for
really
him.
looking good. Right on the money. Right on the money.
And this is just sort of
And we're seeing 1.3 Gs coming around the hack. And turning on the final, your winds on the surface are calm.
he's turning his final approach now to line up for a straight-in touchdown point.
Mach 0.6, range 13 miles. 22,000 feet.
He's got about 90 degrees to turn yet into the straight-in approach to the landing
Looking
point.
very smooth, speed brake at 40.
Now that's from the airborne chase airplane.
Television picture now.
You're right on the glide slope, Columbia. Right on glide slope. Approaching center line, looking great.
This TV from the chase plane. $16,000 feet.
Mark 15.
Airspeed 271 knots.
Now you get a good view of the chase plane joining up.
Fido says it couldn't be any better.
Fido is the flight dynamics officer watching all the guidance information.
11,000 feet.
That's real good over there.
Chase airplane looked him over and he looks good.
9,000. $280 knots.
Everything looks real good.
And John Young has probably done this part of the landing about 1,000 times by now.
So he could do it in his sleep.
9,290.
So the chase airplane calls out the altitude and airspeed to confirm with the Columbia.
$2,500 feet.
Clear?
Very soon he'll start his pull-up and you'll see the gear come out as he approaches the lake bed. Now he's flaring or doing his round out. And the gear should come down about now.
They're coming.
And they're coming
They're
down.
down.
3 down, that's good.
50 feet.
Chase airplane calls out the altitude now above the touchdown point.
10, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, touchdown.
Beautiful. Perfect
Gear,
landing.
10 feet.
Now he'll call the nose gear out, and John will let the nose down very slowly.
5, 4, 3, touchdown. Look above, skipper.
Perfect landing. Couldn't have been any better.
36 times round the Earth, and he comes in as if it was at Heathrow Airport.
Welcome home, Columbia. Beautiful, beautiful.
You want us to take it up for hangar, Joe?
And as far as I can tell from the picture, it's just in
We're
good a
going to
shape
test
as
it
when it
out
left.
first.
And a convoy will now meet them.
I'll tell you that. It was super.
Okay, convoy's on its way.
Convoy on. We'll stop on the Columbia. We'll stop.
But we won't see them for quite a bit, I think, what, 20 minutes or so. They've got to make some tests, make sure there's no gases hanging around, any danger of that kind.
That's true. They have to go through all the safing procedures and make sure there's no leakage of any particular lethal gases. But the crew is quite comfortable.
Official touchdown time, 2 days, 6 hours, 20 minutes, 52 seconds. 2 days, 6 hours, 20 minutes, 52 seconds.
And Columbia, Houston, we're estimating at least 26 more minutes on the ammonia. You're looking real good.
At this time, they're going through a number of procedures to power the ship down, turn off the electricity, and safe all the
Columbia's
systems.
main gear touched the lake bed. The flight director's instructions were prepare for acceleration.
Houston, Columbia 18 shutdown is complete. Going on the doors. Roger.
Convoy is proceeding toward Columbia at this time.
Those are marks on the dry lake bed in order to enable John Young to align himself as he comes down and make it a simulated runway, if you will. One of the reasons they land on the dry lake bed is because he can go almost in any direction and be safe, because it's a hard surface in all directions.
We'll just roll and we'll talk over it, okay?
Well, now they're going to bring up, I think eventually, Jeff, a wind machine in order to blow away anything that might be flammable around.
That's right. This is the first line of protection on the ground, is to just blow away any gases that might be leaking. There are still some gases in the fuel reservoirs for the small orbiting maneuvering engines, and some ammonia, which is used as part of the cooling system. They've still got to cool down the shuttle quite a lot. And during re-entry, the crew are going to get out in about 45 minutes. During re-entry, apart from those chase planes, there was another aircraft up there taking pictures, and it had a special infrared surveillance camera on board, and its purpose was to have a good look at the underside of the orbiter as she came down, and just to see how much heat there was on those tiles, and this will help for further research to see if the protection system can be improved for later flights.
Of course, Dave,
Columbia, this is Convoy 1. How do you read?
well, that's the convoy on the way. People are going to say, why don't they have any engines? Why have they got to bring it in just like a glider? Shouldn't they have a jet engine or something?
Well, no, as you can see, they really don't need an engine, and it takes extra weight to carry that into orbit. And since the early days of the rocket airplanes, such as the X-1 and X-15, utilize essentially the same method or technique, why NASA had a great deal of confidence in being able to recover and land a glider such as this. And as you can see, it worked.
It certainly worked. Came in on time.
Came in on time and precisely on the right flight path.
Call until we verify the valves. We'll get right back to you. Roger that. You guys making a call. I'm just telling you. Okay. Thank you, Crip.
I think that vehicle on the left in front of the shuttle is a sniffer device. It's actually sniffing the air to see if there are any traces of dangerous gases around.
Ohms RCS safing is complete.
They've just safed the rocket engines on board. They've made them safe so that they won't leak or fire.
And here comes everybody.
And these men are wearing what are called scape suits.
Well, while they check out the Columbia, just to make sure that everything is all right, and it'll be 40 minutes or more before the crew come out, Norman Reese has a word for us from America. Norman?
Alistair, there is amazing satisfaction here at this landing, as you can imagine. I imagine many a British Airways captain looking in at those pictures who might be coming on a routine flight from Paris to London would be proud of that landing. I think what's significant about it is that there have been so few problems with the shuttle during its time in orbit and during the landing, that what the Americans have proved here is they have a vehicle that can be very quickly turned around and sent back into space once again. And we are on the verge in a new era of space, as the Americans would say. It's now changed from an era of space exploration to space exploitation. This shuttle, this machine, this magnificent thing has done everything that's been asked of it, and I think done it with considerable style. And as for Commander John Young, I think amazing congratulations on what looked to be a copybook landing. Alistair?
Well, Norman, I'm sure the man who made the tiles and the men who stuck them on are pretty relieved now.
Absolutely, Alistair.
Thank you, Norman.
They can come and...
Well, Dave, there are 3 more shuttles coming along, and when would you think? I mean, if those tiles are in place underneath, when do you think Columbia will fly again?
Well, the plan is to fly in about 5 months, but that always allows to a period of time to analyze potential problems. And therefore, with no problems, I guess I would have to anticipate an earlier flight, earlier than 5 months from now.
Well, it must seem very sophisticated to you. You had to come down in the sea.
Yes, we had to come down on parachutes and in the sea, and as a pilot, I think John Young has the advantage over all that. It's much more comfortable to land your own airplane if you're a pilot.
Their job, big units, big purge and air conditioning units be brought in and attached to Columbia for ground cooling.
They'd like to do a station break in the next 10 minutes. I'm sorry? They'd like to do a station break in the next...
Convoy commander reports the assessment going very well. They haven't found anything out of order yet.
Oh, we'll go into the station break and then come back and do the action. Very good.
Well, they don't have to go through customs or anything. Well, Dave, that's been a real success. Even
Yes.
when the computers didn't work, you were still confident.
Well, I think with the people working that program and the professionalism that's been shown all the way that we have confidence in our people, and that's what really makes it work. The total team makes it work.
And all done out in the open.
All done out in the open for everybody to see. So I think you can have confidence that this system is now proven. 3 more development flights and will be in business, as Norman Reese said, exploiting space.
Thank you very much. So Columbia has landed to fly again. And as it rose in noise and vibration and fire, so it came in quietly, almost peacefully. So we've seen a bit of the future, and it seems to work. More details, and we hope a look at Young and Crippen in the news at 10. Good evening.
Airspeed 271 knots.
That's real good underneath. Three, two, one, touchdown. Those gears, 10 feet. Five, four, three, touchdown. Look above, skipper. Mr. Vice President.
Well, listen, it's a far away from when we were doing our running down there in the Cape, but I certainly want to congratulate you.
When we were doing the...
And wouldn't we all like to congratulate Bob Crippen and Commander John Young? Well, that's it. Columbia is safely on the ground, absolutely on schedule, proving that man can go into space and, as we saw just 11 minutes from now, make a safe return in a spacecraft which is capable of making the journey many, many times. Thank you for being with us for this coverage of the historic mission. On behalf of all of us who've been working on the Columbia program, goodbye.
2,500 feet. Clear. You're coming. You're down. 50 feet. 40. 30. 20. 10. 5. 4. 3. 2. 1. Touchdown. Those gears 10 feet. 5.
Good evening. So the mission is accomplished. At exactly 22 minutes past 7 this evening, right on schedule, the world's first winged spacecraft carried out its final maneuver and landed successfully on a Californian desert. Glowing like a hot rock, to quote the Commander John Young, Columbia announced its presence over the thousands watching in America with a mild sonic boom. Then, protected by 31,000 heat-resistant tiles, the huge craft glided towards the Edwards Air Force Base. The landing was perfect, and the two astronauts inside, John Young and Bob Crippen, were jubilant. After a brief welcome at the base, they'll fly on to Houston in Texas for a week's debriefing. The journey then is over. In 2¼ days from Cape Canaveral to California, they completed 36 orbits of the Earth and proved that this new form of space exploitation rather than exploration really does work. Reporting now, our correspondent, Martin Bell.
It began with a wake-up call from Mission Control.
Good morning, boy. Oh, John. Creepy. Time to wake up. Time to get up with a big splashdown today.
But the astronauts were already up, though they hadn't been seen on television since the night before. When today's first pictures came through, the astronauts were suiting up while the camera showed the last view of Earth before the closing of the payload door. Down below in the California desert, runway 23 was waiting for them. A 5-mile track marked out across the dry clay of the lake bed. The chase planes, the T-38s, were also standing by. So were the spectators, the crowds in the desert, as 6 miles of traffic jammed the main approach to the airbase. Public interest in the shuttle had caught fire. The landing was something that thousands felt they had to see for themselves. On the last orbit before re-entry, an Air Force telescope had its sights on the Columbia. From then on, contact was voice contact only.
We're just enjoying the view. We'll be with you for 2 minutes, and you'll like to know that 4 chase aircraft have just launched from Eddie and coming up looking for you. Nice and easy does it, John. We're all riding with you.
That was the last contact before re-entry. The most hazardous moments of the flight, a test of the heat shield, and a tense 21-minute wait for mission control.
Hello, Houston. Columbia's here.
Hello, Columbia. Houston's here. How do you read?
Land clear, and we're doing Mach 10.3 at 180 AS.
And we couldn't agree more, John. Your state vector's good. We've got good data in-house.
What a way to come to California.
Airspeed 271 knots.
The Columbia was dropping steeply, coming in at more than 200 miles an hour, a great glider under no power. The landing had to be right.
280 knots.
Everything looks real good. 5,290.
The head-on stop up there.
2,500 feet.
Clear. You're coming. You're down. 50 feet. 40. 30. 20. 10. 5. 4. 3. 2. 1. Touchdown. Those gears 10 feet. 5. 4. 3. Touchdown. Hook 'em off, skipper.
Welcome home, Columbia. Beautiful, beautiful.
This is the world's greatest all-electric flying machine, I'll tell you that. It was super.
Okay, convoy's on its way.
Convoy launch. We'll stop on the Columbia. We'll stop. Rick and Joe, I'd like to pass my congratulations to the Crimson team. You guys did a super job bringing us home.
Well, we appreciate it, and you got a lot of people smiling back here, Trip. Good to have you back.
The Columbia was more than an hour on the ground before the crew got out. An unexpected delay that had the astronauts just a little impatient. It was something that would have to be worked on, they said, if the thing were to get operational. John Young, the commander, was the first to emerge. The applause was from his fellow workers on the ground at Dryden. Bob Crippen followed. The Columbia and its crew are not all that's been retrieved. The solid rocket boosters, which provided most of the power for liftoff, have been recovered from the Atlantic and towed back to Port Canaveral. The return was shadowed by a Soviet ship, a so-called trawler, but the only fish it was looking for were the boosters, an American variety that swims between space flights. This and the return of the Columbia closed out America's most spectacular space enterprise since the moonshots. It's nearly 6 years since the Americans had a man in space, and in that time the Russians have had dozens. So on Florida's Space Coast, where the flight began, there is a feeling, expressed here with more gusto than grammar, of an overdue triumph and of having got one back. Martin Bell, BBC, Cape Canaveral.
So the first flight of the space shuttle has been a success, even if a success slightly qualified by the problems of the heat-resistant tiles. At least 23 areas of damage have been discovered. But all the experts agree, today marks the start of a new era in space travel. An era in which there will be regular space flights by a small fleet of 3 or 4 regularly used spacecraft like this. And we can look ahead now to frequent takeoffs of these sort of things with useful loads into space. For scientists, there'll be things like the Space Telescope. For the communications engineers, there'll be the possibility of cheaper satellite launchers and perhaps even the repair of satellites in space. And for industry, there could be new processors of metal fabrication and vaccine manufacture in weightless conditions. Europe hopes to take part in this exploitation of space with the Germans leading. We have manufactured the Space Lab to take scientists up in the shuttle, and in these shuttle flights of the future, so that they can carry on experiments in orbit inside this payload bay. So far, British industry, however, has shown distinctly muted interest in the possibilities of processors carried on in weightless conditions. But the political and military implications of this American success are probably the most important at the moment. For 6 years, the Russians have had manned spaceflight to themselves, and their orbiting laboratories, the Salyut craft, have been unmatched for reconnaissance or propaganda purposes. Now the Americans have made an enormous leap into a clear space lead. The Russians' verbal attacks on the space shuttle this last week, including saying that it threatens a new arms race, have made their fears clear. If we are indeed going into an era of killer satellites and space weapons, the Americans have a head start. For these orbiters have at least some powers of maneuver and can change the height of their orbits if threatened by any ground-controlled opposition. And if you wanted to design a defense against laser weapons in space, then heat-resistant tiles might seem a very good idea. But, for better or worse, our world won't be the same again after today.
The Columbia comes home, safe and serene. John Young has a perfect landing. Lord Scarman tells Brixton, cooperate, I'll sympathize. The civil servants walk out, holiday flights are in doubt. And how Ipswich showed they can do it. Good evening. The Columbia, the first spacecraft designed to go up and down 100 times, landed perfectly at Edwards Air Force Base in California tonight. The astronauts, John Young and Bob Crippen, had taken it round the Earth 36 times in 54 hours. And Young brought it in, 80 tons without an engine and without quite a few heat tiles, as if it were easy. From America, Norman Reese.
Astronauts Young and Crippen were back in their pressurized spacesuits at the controls of Columbia as they began preparations for re-entry. Telescopes in California had picked up the spaceship's last orbit over the United States. Things were looking good.
John and Cripp, we're 30 seconds from LOS. Want to report that Columbia is in super shape, almost no write-ups. We want her back in the hangar, and you have a preliminary go for the burn.
Landing conditions on the 5-mile-long runway 23 at Rogers Lake, Edwards Air Force Base, were given a final test by a Gulfstream jet modified to handle like the orbiter.
And do you have anything to report as far as approaches to the lake bed? Over.
Negative. We see no obstruction to visibility, and we're just getting intermittent light chop at the higher altitudes.
Outside the base, a 6-mile-long string of traffic was piled up with people trying to get in to view the landing. The vast desert base began to look like one huge car park. At 9:05 in the morning, Californian time, Young and Crippen were given the go-ahead to begin re-entry.
Columbia, your burn attitude looks good to us. Everything aboard looks good to us. You are go for deorbit burn. And we'll go LOS in 30 seconds here. We'll talk to you, Botswana, in 5 minutes. Over.
Okay, understand. Go for the deorbit burn. Thank you, now. That's the best news we've had in 2.5 days. So we've had some mighty good news in those 2.5 days. Talk to you in a while, Joe.
The planes that would chase Columbia down through its final ascent were told to scramble.
You'll like to know that 4 chase aircraft have just launched from Eddie and coming up looking for you.
150 miles up, Columbia was turning from a spacecraft to an aircraft with a burn of its re-engines. From now on, there was no turning back.
On time and nominal. Columbia now committed to entry into the Earth's atmosphere.
As Columbia plunged back to Earth, there was a radio blackout. All communications were lost, and Mission Control waited a tense 21 minutes to hear if Columbia had survived the most critical moments of re-entry.
Range to go 410 nautical miles.
Stand by for mark on 9,700 feet per second.
Hello, Houston, Columbia's here.
Hello, Columbia, Houston's here. How do you read?
Land clear, and we're doing Mach 10.3 at 180 AS.
Columbia was through, swooping down to Earth initially at 6 times the speed of sound.
22,000 feet. Control looking very smooth. Speed break at 40. We have a television picture now.
You're right on the glide slope, Columbia. That's real good underneath. Everything looks real good. 5,290. Okay. 2,500 feet clear. You're coming. You're down. 50 feet. 40. 30. 20. 10. 5. 4. 3. 2. 1. Touchdown. Those gears 10 feet. 5. 4. 3. Touchdown. Look above, skipper.
It was a copybook landing for 50-year-old Flight Commander John Young. With no engines on board, Columbia had touched down like a feather.
Welcome home, Columbia. Beautiful, beautiful. You'll have to take it up for hangar, Joe. We're going to dust it off first. This is the world's greatest all-electric flying machine, I'll tell you that. It was super. Okay, convoy's on its way. Convoy on. Wheel stop on the Columbia. Wheel stop. Complete. Going on the doors. Roger. No legal entry. Would you like us to take it down with the switch?
And it was John Young who emerged first. The 50-year-old veteran who'd walked on the moon had conquered another frontier. Mission Control rose like a man to applaud. Norman Reese, News at 10 at the Kennedy Space Center.
And now David Scott of Apollo 9 and 15, who's been listening and watching with us. Dave, just what has been achieved?
I think we've achieved a significant accomplishment in the next stage of the exploitation of space.
Now, just what do you think is going to be done? You really believe that these shuttles are going to go up regularly?
Yes, I think this demonstrates the concept very clearly, that it works, and it works very, very well. And I think in the future we'll see shuttles launching one a week.
Now, many of these will be for military purposes.
Well, yes, I'm sure that the Air Force will use some of the shuttles as their standard launch vehicle, but for the most part, I think the shuttle will be a commercial vehicle to carry satellites into space, experiments into space, and enable us to explore further the space frontier.
Now, do you think the craft has behaved better than expected?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Much better than expected.
And the manufacturer of the tiles and the men who glued them on, they'll be happy tonight.
Well, I think we have a few tile problems, that's true. Some tiles were lost. There are questions about that, but they were not critical, and I'm sure when the technicians get in there and the engineers, they'll find a solution.
Well, now, what was the moment when you really felt that the mission was a success?
Well, I think when we saw John Young come out of the blackout, and we had a visual sighting through the long-range cameras, could actually see the spacecraft was on track, and we knew John Young, once he got to that point, would land it successfully.
And what might the damage have been? I mean, could they have hurt the undercarriage?
Yes, if the tiles had come off, numerous things could have happened. Among them could have been blowing the tires or overheating the undercarriage so it wouldn't come down.
Well, so you're back in business in space, and you think America's ahead?
You bet we're ahead. I think that this has been a spectacular success. And I think the people who put it together, the team who had worked for years and years, really need to be complimented. But we're all proud of our country for this achievement. And I think we realize that the space program is probably the only arena of worldwide interest in which the United States can demonstrate at the same time its peaceful intentions, its scientific expertise, its technological strength, and the openness of its...
3.5 hours. Mrs. Thatcher.
Let's click off.
For that
Tonight to flash her congratulations to President Reagan on the shuttle's success. The development, she said, of the space shuttle opens a new era in the space age, and I share the pride you must be feeling. In Russia, people heard the news 47 minutes after it was announced in California. Moscow radio said the American space shuttle has returned to Earth. And TASS, the Soviet news agency, said the shuttle has a special significance not so much for scientific and research organizations as for the Pentagon. Well, considering that they were breaking through quite untried technical barriers almost with every second that passed, the calmness and the constant exchange of light-hearted humour between astronauts and controllers has been a remarkable piece of professionalism. They may have known it would all go like clockwork, but it looked pretty much like a miracle to most of us. It began this morning with a wake-up call for astronauts John Young and Bob Crippen.
Good morning, boy. Oh, John. Repeat. Time to wake up. Time to get up with a big splashdown today.
As the sun rose over Edwards Air Force Base in California, the crowds poured in. 150,000 altogether, with the riot police on hand, just in case their excitement got the better of them. Meanwhile, up in the cockpit there, the two astronauts first had breakfast, and then they had to close up the shuttle's big payload doors, ready for re-entry into the Earth's atmosphere. Over the Indian Ocean, the return journey began. It was to take an hour, and here first is a diagram of the stages they went through. In their 37th orbit, 170 miles above the Earth, Columbia's astronauts were ordered to fire the so-called deorbit burn. The orbiter's two small maneuvering engines were fired to slow it down and cause it to drop out of orbit towards the atmosphere. 35 minutes later, 80 miles above the Earth, Columbia hit the full heat of the atmosphere. And as the temperature on the underside rose to up to 2,700 degrees Fahrenheit, communication came to an end in the enormous swirl of heat. The blackout lasted about a quarter of an hour, and then 34 miles above the Earth, Columbia broke out into contact again. The worst was over, and Captain John Young took the controls to pilot the spacecraft down in a steep glide to make his landing in California. Well, high-precision cameras on the ground and in chasing aircraft brought us pictures of those last 30 minutes after the orbiter emerged from the communications blackout. But we'll begin the story just a couple of minutes earlier, 15 minutes into the blackout, when no one could be really sure what would happen.
This is Mission Control, Houston. Mark 2 minutes. Time we should be able to talk to the crew aboard Columbia.
As these animated pictures show, these were the moments of maximum heat on the orbiter as it re-entered the atmosphere. No radio signal could penetrate that envelope of hot gas. No one knew just how well those tiles were bearing it.
Mark 1 minute.
Then, as the jet chaser planes scanned the sky, came the first glimpse and sound of the spacecraft.
Stand by for mark on 9,700 feet per second.
Hello, Houston. Columbia's here.
Hello, Columbia. Houston's here. How do you read?
Plan clear, and we're doing Mach 10.3 at 180 AS.
And we couldn't agree more, John. Your state vector's good. We've got good data in-house.
Okay, well, looks to me like the all over day is normal.
RCS quantity and APA quantity looking good. Mark Mach 9 at 9,700 feet per second.
Columbia, you got perfect energy, perfect ground track.
Roger that.
Columbia now 9 times the speed of sound. Flight dynamics
And John,
officer
we're
says
showing
he's
you rolling
perfect.
right. Looking good.
Normal roll.
Ejection seats can be used now.
Beautiful.
Below 100,000. Control very smooth.
Columbia, you're really looking good. Right on the money. Right on the money.
Fido says it couldn't be any better.
Where we started getting pictures beamed from those chaser planes.
2,500 feet.
Clear.
A few seconds before touchdown, John Young leveled the orbiter out and settled down to come in to land at a speed of 215 miles an hour. He knew he only had one chance at it.
Good down. 50 feet. 40, 30, 20, 10, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Touchdown. Those gears, 10 feet. 5, 4, 3, touchdown. Look about, skipper. Welcome home, Columbia. Beautiful, beautiful.
This is Mission Control, Houston. The unofficial touchdown time, 2 days, 6 hours, 20 minutes, 52 seconds. 2 days, 6 hours, 20 minutes, 52 seconds.
And Columbia, Houston, we're estimating at least 26 more minutes on the ammonia. You're looking real good.
Then in went the recovery team. First, the orbiter's fuselage had to be checked for toxic gases. Men in protective clothing used sniffers to make sure Columbia was clean.
On the flight director loop to inform the flight control team that he has just received a telephone call.
Columbia, Houston, you're clear to power order DFI, and we have a message from President Carter. Ex-President Carter would like to pass their congratulations to you for a job well done.
Hey, Brett.
Nearly an hour later, and still cooped up inside, Young was getting a touch impatient.
Still there?
Yes, sir, we are, and we're eagerly anticipating your departure.
Well, we're still here, you know, and if we're going to get this thing operational, this is one of the parts we're going to have to work on a little more. You know what I mean?
John, I'm pushing as hard as I can.
At last, Young emerged.
And that's a good picture, John, coming down.
John Young's not going to wait for Dr.
For the backroom boys at the Houston Space Center, that was it. They broke up in applause and relief. And Young, with his fifth and most spectacular visit to space now behind him, went on, like any good pilot, to inspect his undercarriage. His fellow astronaut, Bob Crippen, has established himself as the joker on this trip, and he emerged just after the orbiter touched down. He'd leant over to Young and said, "Right, now how about a cup of tea?" Even if they did have all those computers to help them, they've still pulled off an astonishing feat with quite remarkable coolness and put America right back in the space business. Well, now, Geoffrey Pardee, I'm going to start with you and ask you how much of a technical success, first of all, you think this has been?
Well, it's extremely good. I mean, it's a tremendous success because it's a combination of various new technologies all brought together in this reusable vehicle. So there's no question it's the beginning of a new era as planned. I think, obviously, they will be a little happier when they've examined those tiles just to make sure why they came off, and I'll be interested to know if there are any others that came off. But what they have done is demonstrate very clearly that the thermal protection, everything has worked extremely well. They have a fine machine there ready for use in a wide variety of ways.
Now, tell us in practical terms what happens next. What can the orbiter do?
Well, it can do various things much more economically than any form of expendable rocket. It can do certain things which cannot be done in any other way. It can take men up, it can take equipment up. In Space Lab, of course, to start with, which the Europeans have developed, it can perform both technological, medical, biochemistry experiments there in the weightless conditions of orbit, and it can
Do you think those matter? I mean,
yes.
Not many industrialists have expressed a great deal of interest.
They should catch up a little bit. Some of them are rather slow to see the benefits. In Germany, they're forging ahead very much indeed. I'm not saying it's all absolutely proved and we're going to production, but there's a very important facility there which I think is going to be important to non-aerospace companies. So that's the technological side. Then there's the ability to recover spacecraft, to examine them, and of course the military implications are there. So we really open up a whole new field.
Now, Patrick Moore, tell us as an astronomer, what sort of a breakthrough do you think this is?
Oh, it's a tremendous breakthrough, no doubt about that at all. And I think, first of all, absolutely full marks to John Young, of course I know well from Apollo days, and Bob Crippen, because they were, after all, testing a device that hadn't really been tested before with unmanned craft, so they really pulled it off magnificently.
But now, Patrick, we've heard from Geoffrey about the technical opportunities this offers. What, to you, as a person who's interested in space, the discovery of space, the future, what does it mean?
Well, it means, first of all, the opening of an entire new era in astronomy. Because down here on the Earth's surface, we're very much handicapped by the Earth's atmosphere, because it blocks out a lot of light and it blocks out much of the electromagnetic spectrum. And there's a lot we can't do from down here. Now that we have the space shuttle, this leads on to the development of orbital stations, and these will carry large space telescopes. And these will see further than any telescopes done before, and they'll enable us to carry out all kinds of researches in what we may call invisible astronomy. X-rays from space, for example, we can't study from down here at all. And that in turn leads on, I think, eventually to observatories and scientific laboratories on the moon's surface. And I know it's looking a long way ahead to putting up observatories on the moon, but when that happens, and when we have the first lunar observatory and the first lunar scientific base, I think the people there are going to look back to today as the real start of the program. The possibilities are endless.
What do you think is the next great big leap in space? I mean, do you think people will be going to Mars and Venus and things like that, or bigger or faster?
Well, certainly not Venus, I think. No, the next big leap in pure astronomy, and I'm talking now about manned space research and not the unmanned probes, I'm talking about manned research at the moment, I think is going to be the establishment of really major orbiting observatories. And this, of course, couldn't have been done without the shuttle technique. That's going to come next. And that'll happen now, I think, within the next few years.
Geoffrey Pardo, can you tell us now what happens next in terms of shuttles? How many shuttles are they going to build?
Well, 4 are scheduled at the moment. A 5th they would have liked to have started already, but they will build that soon. And the next 2 are going to be very much with the sort of military uses in mind, so that they can get up the frequency, which they hope to get to 1 every 2 weeks, of course.
Do you think there's ever going to be a day where instead of that incredible liftoff that we saw with all that £6 million or whatever it was of thrust, 40 jumbos all banging away together, yes. Do you think there's going to be a day when we can see a thing like this go up into space with much less effort?
No. You need a lot of effort to get up. I think they will go off vertically with a roar of flame for some time. But what you will see in years to come, and not in the near future, of course, will be single-stage rockets to orbit, where we don't have the complications of big solid rockets and external tanks and the like. So that is the sort of development we're moving towards. But I think in the immediate future what we have is a step towards tidying up using the space around us in Earth orbit. Patrick mentioned the observatories. I would say also that there are very large space stations in mind for practical purposes, for Earth observation, for civil purposes, for example. This is benefiting many people in the world, not just developed countries.
There's one thing also you've got to remember. You talked about sending men to Mars. Well, that won't come yet a while, but eventually it will. And when the first Mars expedition sets off, it won't go from the Earth, it will go from space. And again, you come back to today's successful launch of the shuttle.
Patrick Moore, Geoffrey Pardo, thank you very much. Finally, just to put it all into perspective, a reminder that it is 20 years to the day after the first ever manned space flight. It was on April the 12th, 1961, that Yuri Gagarin took off in the spaceship Vostok. He completed the first ever orbit of the Earth and returned safely just 108 minutes later. The Russians greeted his achievement ecstatically, proclaiming their obvious superiority in the space race. And there are many who would say that apart from those Apollo moonwalks, that's the way it stayed, with the Russians ahead until tonight.
2 decades then of space flight from the Russian, who landed on his 2 feet at the end of a parachute in a plowed field to be welcomed by gaping Russian peasants, to the 2 Americans who brought down their spacecraft with the skill and assurance of commercial airline pilots with thousands of miles to their credit. And now, with today's main news story at home,